stress management workshop. I just want you guys to all just pay attention right now. I think it's very relevant. Just everybody, I just want to pause for a second. Pay attention to how you're feeling in this moment and observe your environment. Notice the state you're in. Notice your breathing. Some of you are doing things. Some of you are in a heightened state. Some of you are sitting down in your bed and more relaxed. Okay? Just observe that. Because like part of stress management is just being aware of how you're feeling. Now I'm going to share my screen and we're going to go through this workshop. If anybody can't see anything, has any problems, just message in the top right corner. So, what is stress? And why is it important? So, briefly, stress can be encapsulated from so many different influences. We have chemical stress from toxins in our environment. We have a physical stress from things like training and exercise. We have an emotional and cognitive and mental stress. There are so many different facets of stress that build up into what's called allostatic load. That's probably something to note down. It's not in the spreadsheet or in the PowerPoint. Allostatic load being this total burden of stress that builds and builds and eventually overwhelms the person. So when we think about stress, we have to think in totality to not just training or one thing or another, but how do all these things contribute? And so a really nice diagram that I like is this one here. Is that you don't get stronger in the gym. We don't technically adapt in the gym. That is when you can see this red line is when the fatigue and happens, the alarm stage. And it's when we rest and recover to which we get better and adapt. And that can be said of memory, motor skills, and any type of learning. For example, after this presentation, one of the best things you guys can do is rest and just do nothing to let your brain consolidate information. Breakdown of what we're going. So by the end of today, we should have probably a dozen or so different strategies on how to manage stress in a whole bunch of different environments, from training to emotional to mental to different outlets from journaling to controlling environment to some really obscure ones with that we'll talk about soon. And this is another example that I just really want to hammer home the point that if you and we do not give ourselves time to rest and recover, and it comes through sleep, it comes through mindfulness, it comes through a lower stress environment, which is very difficult for so many people, then the buildup of stress will just continue and continue. And it will be harder to overcome that. And so the one thing that's paramount in this society that we live in is we think more is better. More is always better, right? And there's a lot of A-type personalities in here. And so we would say that you don't actualize all the work you've done until you actually rest. Even David Goggins needs to sleep, right? The hardest workers in the world will need to sleep and rest and recover in order to continue to improve. I love memes. I love The Simpsons because I'm a big child. And I found this funny. How stress eating, I posted something on Instagram the other day, saw like how to eat. And of me just sitting there in the sun, just breathing, right? And how that can contribute to overconsumption of food. Now, Mr. Kant.
All right, thanks for leading us in, Alex. You kind of jumped straight in there. Alex doesn't fuck around, as everyone who knows Alex goes in there. But I have to sort of just backstep a little bit. Thank you, though. We have a wonderful new team member that's going to be presenting today that I'm not too sure if some of you know. So Sophia, wave.
Hi.
Or say hi. Yep. So Sophia is actually, I'll let her introduce herself when she has one of the next slides. But I just wanted to point out, it's not just Alex and I presenting. She is a fantastic addition to the team. I have the pleasure of coaching her as well, and she's obviously a terrific coach. So, yep. On to one of the things I really wanted to bring into this workshop was not to spend too much time on what Alex just went through, the physiology of stress. That's a whole workshop in and of itself. And you go through that when you're, becoming a coach or dealing with, stress as part of your career. But today's all about giving you guys some really practical walkaways. Like, I don't want you getting bogged down in the theory of what happens to your body. It's like, well, what can we do about it? And one of the things that I will constantly talk about, and even before I really knew or did much with behavior, when I got into coaching, I began to realize that uncertainty was one of the biggest killers towards compliance. So when I had a client and they just were raising a lot of uncertainty and the stress that goes along with that, it would really kill the ability to see consistency. So I came up with this little thing, and it's one of those things like, when you first start out coaching and you're just putting together like little PDFs and stuff. And I had this like little cool diagram that said, it was the 3 C's, and it said certainty, confidence, compliancy. You know what I mean? And it wasn't really sort of like scientifically backed or like that I'd really researched that to put that together. That's just what I found clinically. It's what I found on the floor, is that when I could help get someone certain on certain things, they became far more confident at that thing. They stopped worrying and stressing, and that led to consistency. And consistency, as we know, just leads to results. But what is uncertainty? So as you can see there, uncertainty as applied in our everyday life is when we basically anticipate that the outcome of something is different to we think that's what's going on. So it's that we basically think we're in for a surprise, okay? And that's a very stressful situation for the body to be in. So like Alex said before, it's a big contributing factor towards the allostatic load. That is the total combined stresses that your body is under. Now, you may hear us talk about training being a nice hormetic stress. So hormesis, the word basically means it's a kind of stress that gives you enough of a stimulus that gives you a positive adaptation that can occur from that. But in the case of like a total body burden, a very high allostatic load, from other contributing factors like mental stress and psychological things and so on and so forth, put them all together with training, and training can become no longer the hormetic stress. It can just be a contributor towards that total allostatic load. And we're going to be talking about that today. So when it comes to uncertainty, now sometimes this is a contentious issue, right? Because people go, I'm really certain about what stresses me out. And it's like, yeah, you could identify what stresses you out. I get that totally. But sometimes what is actually causing us the anxiety that's behind the thing that we know is, and you can read it there in italics, it's your brain is trying to figure out what strategy should I select to safeguard my future physical, mental, and social well-being. So when you're encountered with a stress or something that's giving you anxiety or uncertainty, what is often playing out in your mind is you're weighing up, do I take plan A? Do I take plan B? Or do I take plan C? And that lack of knowing which thing to do, which path to implement, is something that can give you a lot of stress. So we basically have 3 things that we look at when we're trying to improve uncertainty. The first is attention. So we take on a hypervigilant state, a heightened state of mental arousal. Okay, so we might call that the fight or flight syndrome, which is associated with an increase in energy going towards the brain. Okay, so that does so at the expense of like the other systems within the body. We're just driving glucose up into the brain because the brain's trying to learn. It's trying to figure out, how do I get rid of this uncertainty? What don't I know here? What's going to help me make that decision? The second thing that happens is a learning phase. Okay, and the learning phase is basically when you have all these glucocorticoids, the stress hormones within the brain. It creates a situation where you can the brain is ready to take on a new perception of the world. Okay, and what that means is basically it's going to take your preconceived views and standpoints, and it's going to realize, well, these aren't good enough. What do I need to learn to solve this uncertainty? Because by learning, then I can basically know what needed to be known and reduce my uncertainty that way. And the final point I'd make is this. It's called habituation. And habituation is a form of adaptation when living with uncertainty. And you can basically be one of 2 people. So a non-habituator, and I want you to think who you are here. A non-habituator is someone who, when you're provoked in stressful situations or uncertain situations ongoing, you always have a really high stress response. Okay, it doesn't diminish over time. Whereas habituator people, they seem to be far more resilient, right? They go, oh, wow, okay, that was uncertain, that was stressful. And then like the next time something similar that occurs, they just have this, it just diminishes really quickly. And they're like, wow, this person just deals with things really quickly. And what they notice is this, and this gets us to the practical takeaway from this slide, is that habituators tend to adopt more realistic expectations about what can be achieved. Okay. And in doing so, they update their goal states. And this is what I like about this is basically a feasibility analysis that they do. They don't become too optimistic or unrealistic with either their capacity to do things, whether they've got the time to do it, whether they can't foresee the obstacles, and so on and so forth. And I'm just going to read something here because there's a wonderful author called Kelly McGonigal, and she wrote The Willpower Instinct, which is all about self-control. But she describes defensive pessimism as this. So we always think optimism is the best state to be in, right? Wrong, okay? Especially when it comes to, I'm going to relate this to, say, dieting for a sec, because we're mainly into health, fitness, nutrition, and things like that. Optimists tend to underestimate the setbacks and the pitfalls. They may overestimate their abilities or the outcomes. And this can turn a small success experience, right? So say they're successful, but they're not as successful as they thought they were going to be. It can turn that into a feeling of failure. Okay, so it becomes a failure experience because they're let down that they didn't do as well as what they thought they would do. So the people that expect the most rewards are actually the least likely to succeed. And this is it's not a bag out on optimism, because you want to have a sense of optimism that is based in reality. And the way that you do that is you do a feasibility review. And a feasibility review is this. Anyone who coaches with Alex or I already kind of knows what your weekly review looks like. It's a what, why, how. What didn't go your way this week? Why didn't it go your way this week? And how are you going to do something immediately to make that thing better? So that's a post hoc kind of review, but you can get in front of it, okay, and go,